But we have a very, very interesting panel today. You know, the ideas about evolution, the need for new ideas. So we brought together a very unique and extremely different group of panelists. So a little bit different. I just like each person on the panel just to reintroduce themselves, tell us about why you're here, just a very brief background, like maybe 30 seconds. And Maureen, why don't we start at the end with you, please?
Hello everyone, again. Very happy to be here. You're probably going to wonder, why is someone from the art world, which is deeply exclusive, elitist, here to talk about this topic? And I've been in the art world for the past 15 years. I was the gallery director of the guy who discovered Banksy, Steve Lazarides, and we now built the art sector, leading talent agency in the sector. The reason I'm from the arts is because I really believe that visuals ultimately can inform new storytelling. From everything that we will say today, you remember 20% of it, and that's okay, we won't take it personally, but you actually remember 60% of what you see daily. And that very much shapes your subconscious, it gets stored in your amygdala, and that informs your behavior, who and what matters, and how you see it. And of course, the topic today are visual biases, and that's a big part of what I wrote for a book I just published with Penguin, and I'm excited to explore the conversation.
Awesome, thank you, Maureen. Anna, please.
I am Ana Aguirre, and I am the director of Alegría, and I've been working for the Salvation Army for the last 27 years. I was 10 years old. And I love working for the Salvation Army. I feel blessed to be part of the, be a small little part of their mission.
Thank you.
I am here.
Hello, my name is Carl. As Philip said in the introduction, I'm a professor at the University of Southern California. Before I came to LA, I served in the US Army for 33 years, so I'm a retired Army veteran, and that's really been my focus of research. Really, since I was on active duty, I studied trauma and stress and leadership and all of those things on the active duty force, and now I still do that as a professor, but I also look at veterans, and particularly this transition from active military service back to civilian communities. And of course, we know that some veterans will end up not transitioning as well as others, so I do a lot of research trying to figure out how we can improve that.
Awesome. Okay, let's get right at it. I'd like to start, Anna, with you, please. You do amazing work with the Salvation Army. Obviously, you're a shelter, working with long-term chronic ill people, HIV/AIDS. You have wonderful after-school programs, etc. I'm curious, especially with your cohort, what creative and innovative ways do you utilize to focus and target on these people in need? What's a little bit different about the folks that you're serving specifically?
We do meet them where they're at. Now we don't see, oh, they're HIV, or they're under the influence. We do admit them and start the process or the healing of their, to be ready for it. Our main focus and our target is housing, okay? So once we bring them in, we do like an assessment. We do a individual service plan. And during that assessment, we find out and what is it that took them there? Why are they in that situation? So our job, besides providing housing, a warm bed, and providing a meal, is trying to find out why they're in that situation, and our job is to make sure they get that assistance, provide the appropriate referral. Because we're not addressing a number, we're addressing a person.
Very, very well put. And I'm curious, in the past few years in dealing with a blowing up population, what type of strategies are you putting into place or ideas around how you can cope with way more business than you can ever hope to achieve?
Never-ending outreach, never-ending networking with other agencies, with our collaborating with other agencies like the Department of Mental Health. That's a big one. Before, we were just taking care of their homeless situation, but now they're dual diagnosed. Not just substance abuse, but mental health. And before, it's been in the field for such a long time, but it's barely now, it's getting noticeable.
Great, so the idea of wraparound services, one-stop shopping.
Of course, it's like a triage. We bring in the client, and we need to have, it's like a triage, medical, mental, well, physical, mental, and, making sure that they have all the services so they could be able to succeed. Because if we don't tackle the reason, they're gonna be just another number coming back to the shelter.
Great, thank you, that's very helpful. Dr. Castro, your work at the University of Southern California Center for Research and Veterans, you recently completed a historic study on veterans and homeless insecurity or home insecurity. I'm curious about what are some of the outcomes of that study. Are there any new innovations or strategies that you've come out of that study with, or ideas around how we can tackle that specifically within the veteran space?
Yeah, and I'm holding up a copy of the technical report. It's written really for anyone to be able to pick up and understand. So it's not written in an academic, heavy-handed way. This is available online, so anyone who would like a paper copy, if you're like, I like to read things in paper, I've got an extra copy here, you're more than welcome to.
And it's free, right, Carl?
And it's free, yes, it's free. And so one of the things that I always think about when I think about veterans, especially when it comes to veterans who struggle in the housing area, is America, like any country in the world I've ever been to, supports its veterans like no one else. And we don't take enough pride and credit for that, but it's true. And the amount of resources that go into tackling veteran homelessness and that we haven't solved it causes me concern, because if we can't solve a veteran homeless problem, there is no way in hell we're ever going to solve a civilian homeless problem, period. Because we're talking about over $200,000 a year spent for every homeless veteran, and they're still homeless. You could have bought them a home. Not in LA, but you know what I mean. You get my point. So what is it that one makes them go on that trajectory? One of the things we did for the first time, I think the only ones who've ever done this, is we asked service members, when you are leaving, or veterans, when you left the military, what was your housing situation? Believe it or not, 17% of all active duty service members who left the military were by definition homeless on the day they left. And we act like they became homeless, and some do become homeless, but 17% started out homeless. And so that to me that's not an innovative solution, but I think it's a novel finding. I mean, it always existed before we found it, but it's like, well, why didn't you think to ask this question 20 years ago or 30 years ago, right? Because we know to the day when a service member leaves the military. We know to the day that happens, to the minute. And if we can't stop homelessness from happening, knowing that, how are we going to get in front of the problem among civilians? So I'm always looking to see what can we learn in this veteran population that can be used? And then what are those challenges? And even though the veteran, it seems to be stabilized, maybe going down a little bit, but it still should be zero given that all the things we know, all the resources they receive, but again, we are in the reaction mode and not the prevention mode. I get in trouble with the VA because I accuse them of doing no prevention work, and they get mad at me because they say we do prevention. I say, well, you don't. You do recidivism. I don't know what another word for it, but you prevent veterans from becoming homeless again. Is there a word for that? And I know that's a prison term, recidivism.
Now's your chance, Dr. Pastor. You got to come up with
So, but the idea is you want to get up, you want to get ahead of that, or right? Left a boom, as they say in the field artillery. And right now, I think we're right a boom. And so that's just one of the findings. We also, and I think this, we talk a lot about mental health and physical health. But the single biggest predictor of veteran homelessness, not a predictor because it's a cross-sectional study, the greatest association, you could call it a risk factor if you like, is food insecurity. By a bunch. Food insecurity, and if you think about it, it makes sense, right? It's between paying my rent or having food, people generally give up food first, believe it or not. So that tells me people don't want to be homeless, right? If you're willing to give up food over rent, you're not like trying to be homeless. And then it's loneliness. So that was relationships that were talked about earlier, that we were talking about at lunch. Relationships are fundamental. And then really a distant third and fourth are mental health issues and substance use issues and physical health issues. I know we focus on those because that's the wraparound care, but we sometimes forget Maslow's hierarchy, right? If you think about Maslow's hierarchy, food, safety, water, shelter, right? I think Maslow's error, by the way, if you don't learn anything else, learn that relationships is on the bottom. He's got it higher up. He's wrong. We thrive on relationships, and the relationships begin with ourselves. Suicide was mentioned before lunch. How do you feel about yourself? What are your relationships with each other? Have you burnt every bridge of everyone you've ever known on your way down? Generally, yes. And if you have substance abuse, you've stolen from your friends and families on the way down too. So they don't want to do anything to do with you, or they say that, but I know family, they do, but you think, okay, I really did them wrong. So these are the things that we look at in this report, and I won't go, you can read it yourself, but I just want to highlight those few things. That food insecurity could be a very, very early predictor. For those of you who are doing assessments, ask about that. Ask about loneliness. Ask about relationships, said differently. And then you can ask about mental health and physical health. Those are usually the things we ask about first, because, we want to treat you, versus do you really want to help someone? So I stopped there. That was a very long answer, and I apologize for that.
Well done, Carl. No, much appreciated.
But I am in academia now. So.
Yes, you are. And it's not lost on me in talking with the majors when they first came over. We're talking about, the dates. We know when someone's going to separate from the military, right? What's that sound like? Foster kids, right? What are some of the cross learnings that can be happening for both of those? Because it's a damn shame that those kids walk out at age 18, whatever it is, and boom, recidivism, whatever you want to say, the same thing. They're back on the streets, not unlike military.
And also, for those of you who study immigration, especially undocumented immigrants, they're coming here with no home too, by the way. They're coming here with no place to live that they're going to try to figure out. So there's a lot of groups that fit in this pattern of leaving what they know for something that they think is better. But believe it or not, most service members leave because they think it's going to be better, not worse. But if you start off with no place to live, you've got an uphill battle from there.
Thank you, Carl. So we're going to switch gears. Maureen, let's switch over to you now. And your work in the art world and studies in writing your best-selling book, which you have there, The Visual Detox, which is a fascinating read. Can you discuss the impact of visual biases on homelessness? I know some ideas around the neurological studies around that and reactions towards the current representations of homelessness in society.
Yes, so I think let's take a step back. So on a day-to-day basis, you are looking at 10,000 images. Those images are not just digital, this is literally you as you walk around the streets. I think being in LA, is almost where the burst of advertising has been created. I'm sure I don't have to explain how this works. Those imagery and those visual narratives are quite simple right now, where you are elevating anyone that can consume and a certain type of consumer. That's at a commercial level, which is a majority of images in the first place. When you look in terms of public sculptures, 97% of them are made by men, representing men on literal pedestal, and a certain type of men. So In terms of visual narrative, you have it. You have a 0.5% of people who is constantly elevated, constantly represented. That's on the one hand in terms of the visual narrative. What we know, and that's the research of neuroscientist Owen Clayton, is that ultimately something that you see often brings familiarity, and you also humanize those people better, right? So the visuals again will kind of bring warmth. So now we're lucky that we can scan the brain, so we can see the reaction that you will ultimately have as you're looking at a visual. And someone that you see therefore very regularly as a visual, you will be thinking, oh, that's quite warm and friendly. That's the same with neighbors and when now you kind of see. Anyone that you do not see, you have a bit of distrust, a bit of dislike, a bit of fear. Ultimately, you cannot humanize that person. By definition, you cannot understand what their thought process are, what their emotional thinking is. Like you just cannot relate. When it comes to homelessness, the majority of the images that we see represents someone that's a guy usually on the streets, looks a bit dirty and drug addict. This is literally mostly what we have. Now there's a reasoning behind that, is help raising fundings, because what we do know is that it kind of triggers pity to a degree, because then you think, I must go and help that person. Unfortunately, pity is also biased. Disgust and pity are, as you know yourself, it's the same. You're ultimately not humanizing the person in front of you. And I will call myself as that. If you have pity, then this is not helpful, unfortunately. So what we do need is new narratives, visually. We just launched, I'm fresh out of having just launched a public art project that is in the centre of London in front of Buckingham Palace, where half of the sculptures represent people who are from lower social economics and ultimately were homeless before. So you need a new way to tell who those people are, a new way to familiarize around them, and also a new way for people to connect with who those people are humanly. We've delivered about 300 projects, as you know, over the past 9 years, so the team has been very busy, and it's not just on that topic. But I think what we can learn from visual biases is, unfortunately, we see visual biases all day long. We talked for 2 seconds about homelessness, but it's the same when it comes to female empowerment. You're constantly objectified, so saying to a girl, you go and do it and be empowered, it could be really hard in the context of what she's constantly looking at on a day-to-day basis. So it affects all types of people, not just that population. But I think we're talking about storytelling, and we're talking about the fact that we are scared to ultimately commission that new types of storytelling. And yet again, back to the stats I was giving earlier, is those visuals are shaping much more what we're going to do, what we're going to value society-wise, than any words we may be exchanging. And that's, I think, kind of looking at the visual impact, the visual neuroscience is absolutely essential, especially when we have now all the studies that prove that this is only creating further discrimination and further distance and no ability to humanize those people.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Maureen. Let's shift back to Anna. A question for you. And you're working with this very special populace. You have certain protocols, certain processes that seem to work, or ideas. Are there any strategies, do you think, the broader population of caregivers or providers could learn from what you're doing at your 4 centers to help combat homelessness at large, or ways of providing unique solution sets for these people, etc.?
Yes, having the team with the same mentality and the same vision and the same goals. I know I am going to cheat Major Lisa Sena to write down my notes, but I wanted to make sure that I want to first thank everyone that is here. That means that you care for our homeless population. When I say our, because it's all of our problem. We're in LA County, so it is our problem. So I know together we might be able to fix a little portion of the problem. Because I do see it, let's treat it as an epidemic. What happened when COVID-19 happened? Everybody reacted. So we need everybody's reaction to this. So my goal with the team, not just mine, but people that work with me, the case managers, program managers, the cooks, everybody's important. Without a cook, many meals are not cooked. So they're important. So we do carry this goal, and I want to say it. So, I have 5, so they know, and we all need to be on the same page. So my one is increase the number of people permanently leaving homelessness. That's our priority as soon as our client comes in. Increase number of people moving from encampments into permanent housing. I say that because we have Lafayette. And we do have, it's a 72 beds for individuals. However, we're in the park, we still have encampments there. And our goal is to not have them there, have them inside our shelter, okay? Number 3 is increase number of access to affordable housing units in LA County. They're not enough. So my goal is to target the ones that become available, but then I cannot become greedy, right? I need to share. Sharing is caring. Okay. Number 4 is reduce the number of people with a mental illness and or substance abuse disorder experiencing homelessness, okay? And I think it takes not just one person, it takes a lot of us because our focus is differently. So we need a whole team. We need a mental health provider. We need, and they're great, but they're not enough. They're not enough. Number 5 is reduce the number of people falling into homelessness. That means prevention and retention. And sadly, we don't have enough funds for prevention or retention. Yes, we do house and we do have a high number of placements, but I want to see the retention ones. That's the important ones.
That's awesome. I want to add one for a challenge for the group at large. This would be number 6 or 7. If you're sitting out here, you all care, we love that, but if you really want to rock your world, go to a shelter. Find out the shelter nearest you. Go see it. Go spend a day. Walk through it. Go spend an hour. I had no idea during COVID the after-school programs that went on. I had no idea that someday, because I showed up at Red Shield, I get to meet David Beckham. So you never know who's going to be there. But in all seriousness, go to one. And then you'll figure out on your own way, is it time, treasure, or talent perhaps that you can provide? And the beautiful thing about it is we all come from different backgrounds, different faiths, different religions. We're all about just getting it done. Right? We don't care. We don't have any badge. We don't have any. We have a cross historically, but look, we're out to serve the best, do the most good. So let's move on. Carl, question for you, a little more pointed here. Coming out of your veterans study around homelessness, food insecurity, etc., are there 1 or 2 areas that you think perhaps in the larger homelessness issue we're not paying attention to that we should? Or areas of focus from you're seeing that could easily and readily come out of your outcomes, findings, or recommendations that we should consider for the larger homelessness issues?
That's a great question. And let me answer that question by answering another question you didn't ask.
That's my goal. Thank you, Professor.
He's electable.
But it gets at the point you're making, and it's the part that we missed in this study. And that is, we don't pay, so I think like of all of the different groups that are experiencing homeless, the one that I don't think there'd be any debate on, and I know sometimes we don't like to say priority of housing, those kinds of things, but it would be children. And that's, I'm telling you my bias too, right? But I'm assuming everyone has this, or most of us have this bias of helping mothers with young children, school-age children, getting them in permanent housing. And I see it in my community. And I think everybody sees it, they just ignore it. And so one way to get in front of this particular issue, I think, is through using the school system, and in particular the PTAs in Los Angeles, to identify those families at risk that are already homeless. And, you know, another group is students at USC, at community colleges, and I don't know the UCLA alumni in here, I'm sure it's at every university. And, you know, so there are things we can do nipping away at the most vulnerable, which I would say is the children, and getting them in permanent housing. Of course, I like veterans, but then still, children are above them in terms of priority. And I think, so and we didn't even look at that in this study because I think in some levels we don't want to really know the answer. We don't want to think that we have school-age children still trying to go to school who are homeless. And Ben left, so I can't grill him on his homeless count, which I think undercounts that group for lots of reasons. It's not deliberate, it's just the nature of how we do the process. But we've got to start at least getting in front of the curve here a little bit, focusing on the children so it doesn't become routine. We don't lose them to school dropouts. We don't lose the parents and then they become in the foster system. All of these things feed on itself, but it starts with the family and supporting mothers with young children. You know, we talk about, I don't know if any of you have been following the rapid decline of the population of the world, right? I mean, everyone's alarmed about that. Before it was too many of us, now there's not enough, right? And it's all the women's fault for not having kids. Not the men's fault for making their lives miserable so they don't want to have kids, right? So, you know, this gets a various point about the imaging, right? And so, but we've got to really think about how to support mothers with children, young children, better in society, and I think we can start doing that. And in social work, we've talked a lot about, where's my social workers, by the way? Come on, where are you? You already all left, okay? We talk about communities, and I encourage us to go one level down and talk about neighborhoods. I'm a big neighborhood proponent. I think things happen in the neighborhood. I know neighborhoods make up communities, I get that, but it happens in the neighborhood. Pay attention to what's going on in your neighborhood. This is, by the way, the pot calling the kettle black. I'm terrible at it. My wife knows more what's going on than I do by a mile, but I try to pay attention to what she tells me. So we didn't talk about any of that in here. So I guess what I'm saying is there are flaws in this because of the biases. Thanks for reminding me of all the ones that I have. I try to be aware of them. But we can really do a better job. If we're going to try to nibble, let's say there's no families that are homeless in LA. That'd be like a real, reachable, achievable goal. In 3 years' time, no families are homeless in LA. I think it's doable. That's doable. And you could make, I think when Obama was president, he had a 5-year plan to end veteran homelessness, right? Where are we at now? For a 10, 12 years later, we're not going to reach that goal. We're not going to reach that goal in 20 years with the current processes, with the current system. And I will say this in the veteran space, it's not about the money. There is enough money to end veteran homelessness. For sure. For sure. And then you said, well, why hasn't it ended? That's a whole nother symposium. But I have ideas if you want to say something.
Hey, Carl, that's great. I want to flip over to Maureen. Maureen, you can process this. Tell us about the power of new visuals. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on that aren't powerful. What kind of things are you working on, or areas you think we could focus on, specifically around homelessness or related, for kind of a new visual paradigm, shifting those perceptions?
Yes, I think something that's really powerful, as we discussed earlier, is the fact that you could connect with someone much more directly and not having that distance, thinking that's othering, that would never happen to me. And back to that kind of 1% of homelessness are mostly what we see the depiction of, and we don't see the 99%, is trying to make sure that we see the 99%. In London, there's an amazing charity that is dedicated to women who are homeless, and they are starting to create their own imagery with us. They're starting to ultimately create their representation. Wayne Clayton, who I mentioned earlier, has also published a book on that. But it's about making sure that we don't put our voice onto them. It's about making sure that they lead with how they want to self-represent. You can provide a photographer, you can provide how they want to do it, but they self-direct that. The project that we just launched on Sunday was fully led. So it's giving the materials that self-representation is possible, and not how we are perceiving them, and again creating that gap further away from them and us, you know. So I think that there's a lot of research around it, and we have a series of upcoming projects that are specifically tackling it. What's really interesting is going back to kind of visual environments. I'm a big believer that visual environment, the one of our city, is a civic space. At no point did we sign up saying this will be mostly a commercial space and will be mostly consumers. We haven't signed up that paperwork. I mean, we have in terms of the apps of our phone, but we haven't signed up that paperwork when it comes to our cities. So it's an important reflection to think, what's the proportion do I want in my city space to kind of be constantly bombarded by a type of visual narrative? How can I make sure at a console or bed level to ultimately commission, be behind visual narratives that are different, which means that as we commute to work, we just get exposed to very different types of narrative. Another thing that, in terms of bad habits, and we talked earlier at lunchtime on also how people can ultimately get into poverty, but it's worth knowing that when it comes to visual pollution, that 4 out of 5 billboards are in low socioeconomic area. So meaning you're constantly pushed to have consumer debt and unnecessary spending already into areas that are really struggling financially. And 4 out of 5 is a huge number. This is not 1 out of 2, this is massive. And again, you know, images are always dismissed as acute and frivolous, and it's just a little bit of that, but think about that number. I live in a very privileged area in London, like my kids just get to see ultimately a bit of art, a bit of nature, they don't get bombarded with that. That will shape where you think you should be, because we all want to belong. We talk about communities, we're going to be ultimately obeying the visual codes we're being given, and we are completely divided on the habits we're being told to ultimately follow. Not to mention that the act of visual literacy, so the idea that you can decode imagery, which is right now incredibly essential in an era of visual misinformation and ultimately visual manipulation with software and AI and all the things that we know, that can be accessed through the arts, which is, again, as we know, something that will be accessed by kids who are born privileged. So you have your gaps in terms of education, you have your gaps in terms of your civic space. I think for me, the direct solution for all of you in this room, I constantly sit on committees of public arts and no one ever turns up, or there's one John that turns up with a very loud opinion. I need people to turn up to this meeting and think that this is not some random frivolous thing that's going up, but actually that storytelling that's going to be put on your streets will be shaping how you're ultimately perceiving those communities. And I need a bit of debate, and we might disagree on what we want to see, but that disagreement is incredibly healthy. Rather than there's no one turning up to it, everyone thinks, again, the visuals is totally irrelevant and to be pushed away. So do join this meeting. Downtown LA has an incredible bid here. They do loads of work. Like, you have one in every single area, and then again can be pushed with new visual narratives.
Wonderful. And we're winding down, but we have such an esteemed panel here. I'm so impressed. I've learned a lot, so much today. Any questions from the audience? Anyone like to ping them? We'll go over to Mr. Jones.
Dr. Castro, what's the name of your publication online?
This is Carl.
Action
Thank you, sir.
Others?
Now, before you think that was for you, I don't have to carry that back.
For the benefit of the rest of us, what is the name of it?
The State of the American Veteran.
The State of the American Veteran, the Southern California Veteran State.
So this was, one of the things also in this that you'll see is the housing insecurity has not changed in Southern California for the last decade. That's good news, given that overall homeless rates have been steadily increasing over the last decade. So being steady in this case is not great, but it's not as bad as it could be.
Question.
It was
Please.
the same question about his study, but also, Dr. Castro, do you share your findings with the mayor's office, council districts, or is there kind of a nexus?
So thank you, because one of the things that I'm horrible at, that my colleague has now embarrassed me, this study was led by Dr. Sarah Kinsel, and she's first author on this report. You'll see her name first. She has personally given over 200 presentations in both San Diego, Orange County, and LA on those findings. So if anyone is interested in having Dr. Kensel or myself, although they never ask me, they always ask Dr. Kensel, to come and present on those findings anywhere, we'd be happy to do so. And also, just to get another selfless plug, on 2 October, we are hosting a conference in Long Beach, a one-day meeting, one-day conference, that's going to go over these findings and how the community can use the findings from this study to help write grants, to justify additional resources, et cetera, et cetera. So everyone, of course, is invited to that. And you can, if you just Google Southern California Conference, it'll come up. Dr. Kensel maintains that website, but hope to see some folks there. There's a $50 cost to attend. We only do that because in LA, 60% of those who say, I'll definitely be there, won't show up, right? And so we say, okay, make them pay $50 and we can get it up to maybe 50 or 60% will show up. So it's, but if you can't afford $50, just let me know and I'll talk to Dr. Kensel, you can come for free.
Awesome. Awesome. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Please, sir, John.
So, Dr. Castro, we talked about this a little bit at the break. We saw the recent decision by Judge Carter regarding the VA facility in West LA. In your mind, what would be the optimal use of the VA? How could the VA move forward to try to solve the homelessness of the veterans?
Well, that's a great question. Are folks familiar with the whole controversy on the West LA VA campus? So basically, the land was gifted for veteran use shortly after the Civil War, to give you an idea how far back this goes. So it was originally intended just to help veterans from the Civil War, okay? And then the VA took it over, and of course we have a hospital there. For those of you who like movies, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was filmed in one of the buildings on that campus that's now boarded up and chained and still standing though. And there's some other historical buildings on the campus. The VA, depending on your perspective, I'll try to be as neutral about this as I can. The VA has allowed the use of that land for purposes that it was not intended. There's a UCLA baseball stadium on that property. There's a rental car company on that property. There's a very, very prestigious private school that sits on that property.
Golf course.
And so the idea is veterans are angry about that. And now they're building a metro stop on that campus that bizarrely has veterans angry too. Primarily because they know it's only being built to service the baseball stadium for the Olympics, has nothing to do for veterans, all right? So this is how veterans' brains work, all right? They're saying they never would have built this if it wasn't for the Olympics, and they're only doing it to get to the UCLA campus. Fair enough. That's probably accurate. I've not heard any politician say that wasn't true, by the way. Other than say, well, you know, that's, you can't prove it. Well, you're not denying it, right? So veterans are very, very emotional about this. Very emotional about this. They think the VA is being dishonest, disingenuous. They think the VA has been bought off by the Brentwood community and the politicians who represent that community, who on the one hand say we support veterans, but on the other hand, we're going to allow this land to be used this way. Veterans are willing to, in some ways, let the baseball stadium stand, but they want UCLA to pay full rent for the property, not the $1 a year that it had been, right? Things like that don't sit well. So what would the lease be for the land that the baseball stadium is sitting on?
A lot of money.
I have no idea. All right, I'm not a real estate person. I just say, what would that?
We have similar issues with Salvation Army, don't we?
So these are the issues. In some ways, they're intractable because the veterans want like gobs. The veterans basically want a military installation there. They're not gonna use those words, I'm using those words, but they want housing, they want a commissary there, they want recreational facilities. That's what they really want, I think, when you listen to them. Not what they say, but what are they saying? Okay, that's what I'm hearing. I don't think that's a good thing. I think when military folks leave the service, it's to their benefit to reintegrate back into the civilian community. It's not to their benefit to build VA installations for them to live on for the rest of their life. That's not reintegrating them back into society. I think most veterans maybe would agree with that. There'd be a very large percent who don't agree with that. But I think they're healthier, they do better when they reintegrate back into their civilian community. So I would like to see that. I would like to see those veterans who do have, because we have a lot of veterans who are being cared for by spouses, who are being cared for by their parents, who are going to have long-term health care needs. And they have already done studies to show there's not enough space for them in the VA system when the parents die and can no longer take care of them. This is going to be a massive problem that we're not really paying attention to, but you can see it, right? I don't predict the future, but I can predict the effects of events that have already happened. That's what we all should be focused on. What has already happened and what are going to be those effects? So we already know some of those effects. They do need more long-term veteran care needs. It's extremely expensive to do that. That's why they're trying to, even paying partners and parents to take care of veterans is cheaper for the VA than them doing it full-time. So
Thank you, Carl. And there's a lot of passion there. I know we're at time too, so I want to personally thank each one of our members of the panel.